It's my pleasure to introduce you all to Dr. Jeffrey Lidke. Jeff is a professor of religious studies at Berry College and a specialist in Tantric traditions, both Hindu and Buddhist. Jeff is an initiate of the Kagyu and Nyingma lineages of Tibetan Buddhism and has practiced meditation since age 5. He lives in Rome, Georgia, where he leads the Rome Buddhist Sangha. Today's talk is titled Seeing as a Buddha Sees, Reflections on Buddha Nature and the Ideal of Instant Awakening in Zen and Tantric Buddhist Traditions. Thank you, Dr. Lidke.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be here. And thank you to Hojo Michael Elliston and to Taylor and to the entire Atlanta Soto Zen Center and to John Hinman for being the initial invite. It's a great honor to be here. So I think at some point my slides will come on up. That'll give me my visual cue here. And I think we need to, yes, get those linked there. And then we'll screen it.
It's quite reflective. View presentation.
Yes, there you go. I think that's it. Yeah. Very good. So I'm I've kind of constructed this a bit as a journey narrative reflecting on my journey on the path since I was a child. Of course, Lord Buddha talked about Dharma as a path. And so I've used the metaphor of the meditative spiritual path as a journey up a mountain, and kind of framed it around the question of how do we make this journey, and what do we see when we reach the top? So here's a little bit of my outline. I'm going to talk about my own Dharma journey, what I see as some of the key teachings in Buddhism, the 3 turnings of the wheel, Buddha nature and the 6th patriarch, and the brilliance of Dogen. Okay, so this is the image of the Buddha atop the highest mountain in Vietnam, and he's just gazing, right? Shikam Taza, just sitting, just being. So what does it mean to just sit and to just be? And how does just sitting and just being, how is that a part of this journey on the Dharma? And how does that correspond to my own journey? So at age 5, I was initiated into transcendental meditation by a disciple of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who made kind of brought meditation to the forefront back in the 60s, because he was visited by the Beatles, and particularly George Harrison was very interested in what Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was teaching. And so for me, this was my point of entry into meditation practice at age 5. I was given a mantra, and I remember reciting the mantra. I was told to keep it secret, and just having this kind of initial fascination with the path of meditation. And I think here a little bit in analogously that really Buddhism arises out of a culture of yoga and meditation practice that goes back many thousands of years in India. And so my own journey has been a kind of open-minded, open-hearted exploration of that yoga tradition. And I view the Buddha and his teachings as really distilling the essence of what yoga is about, which is the alignment of the body with the breath, and coming into a state of stillness and awareness that enables us to see the nature of things as they are.
Excuse me, can we just check in with the Zoom group and make sure they're hearing us okay? Are they're hearing us? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Can you move that just a little further? Thank you. I just want to be able to see His Holiness the Karmapa. So another kind of point in my journey that I look back at fondly is my meeting with His Holiness the 16th Karmapa at age 10 in 1979 in San Francisco. My mother, Ann Wells, took me to the black hat ceremony that the Karmapa was giving. And Karmapa is a great teacher in the Kagyu lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. And in the black hat ceremony, the idea is that this is an empowerment in which he is making possible kind of the highest state of Mahamudra, or the great gesture, the great posture, in which you see your nature as it is. Just that kind of direct encounter with one's true nature. And we were in this big hall, and I was just 10 years old, and I just remember having my back turned to the stage, and I was just doing my thing as a 10-year-old. And then my mom tapped me on the shoulder and said, okay, this is you need to turn around and sit quietly, because this is the point where when he takes his hat off, the light comes out and enters into your heart. So I thought, okay, that's kind of that sounds interesting. And so I turned around and sat still, and sure enough, he took off his hat. And of course, the mind is very impressionable, and perhaps certainly at that age, but I definitely have this memory of this like pure white light coming out and touching me in the heart, and just feeling like, wow, that's nice. That's a good feeling. And then also afterwards going up to him in the line, and him offering me an apple, and just smiling and very much welcoming me. So to take that moment in kind of retrospect, as I reflect on it, I think of that as a very kind of special time in my own journey, where I made this connection with the Kagyu tradition of Mahamudra, and its kind of focus on attuning oneself into this present moment to see the nature of things as they are. And I will come back to my connection with Kagyu in a bit. This was also the same year that my kind of immersion into Hindu traditions of yoga, meditation, and revelation of true nature also took another step. In 1979. My mother also brought me to meet Swami Muktananda. So this is in the Hindu yoga tradition particularly called Siddha Yoga. And here's a famous picture of him giving initiation, or what is called Shaktipat. And, if the journey to enlightenment is a journey up a mountain, and of course, it's all metaphorical, and in a Buddhist context where we focus on not going anywhere or being anything, we may shy away from journeys, journey narratives. But if it is a journey, then mine certainly has been one that's been fed by these two traditions of Buddhism and Hinduism. And I've really kind of enjoyed exploring the intersection of the two and the influence on the two, particularly through the Tantric tradition. So at this time in my life, we were living in Mill Valley, and we also had a connection to the Green Gulch Farm Zen Center, and would spend time going there for Sunday programs and meditating. And so this was kind of also part of my journey, as was Mill Valley Aikido. And my own path of kind of meditative practice has been enriched by my engagement in martial arts. As when I was younger, I was involved in Aikido, and then later, when I was at grad school in Santa Barbara, I started studying Tai Chi Chuan, and became very interested in the ideal of Mushin, of the integration of body posture, breath, and awareness that was at the foundation of the Aikido and Tai Chi Chuan traditions. And how that's just very similar also to the principles of yoga, right? And the integration of asana with pranayama, and then moving into dharana, dhyana and samadhi, right? Body, breath, awareness, and integration. So, kind of moving forward in time, in high school, I started to find that my interest in spiritual practice was increasing, and I had the opportunity to meet Kalu Rinpoche and take the Kala Chakra initiation, and learn some mantras and practices associated with the meditation on the mandala and the idea of the bodhisattva, and learning to think of oneself in a greater community of beings whose suffering is equally relevant to your own, and learning the idea of you're not on this path for your own benefit, you're on this path of awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. And this was also the same time in my life where I started to spend time with Guru Mai in her ashram in City Yoga. She was the successor of Swami Muktananda, who I met at age 10. So there was about age 16 to 24 where I was spending my summers at her ashram and learning some of the meditation techniques that she was teaching, or entering into a state that she called Shiva consciousness. So in the City Yoga tradition, different terms were being used, but there was this idea that in a state of stillness, there was a higher awareness that would be present, is deeper than just the ego and the kind of ordinary thoughts, and that one could connect to what she called Shiva consciousness. And it was also during this time I started to deepen my studies of the Tantric tradition, and got really interested in the ways that as Buddhism and Hindu yoga developed, you enter into this time period beginning around 5th, 6th century CE, where you have great yogis in both the Hindu and the Buddhist tradition talking about sahaja, which literally means what you are born with. The Sanskrit verb ja means what's born, and saha means together with. And this is a great Buddhist Mahasiddha featured here, Sharaha. And the idea of the sahaja is this understanding that our innate consciousness, our innate awareness is ultimately what we are seeking, the thing that we were already born with, and that which we had even before we were born. And that is the goal of this path. And so this idea was very fascinating to me, that I was somehow looking for my own innate nature, and that in some way that innate nature had somehow gotten lost, it had gotten covered up. We see this idea in other mystical traditions like Taoism, right? The idea of coming to a knowledge that's actually beyond words, and it's taking you back to what you've always been, what you already are, but somehow has been covered up by all these concepts we have about who we are through these labels that get pinned onto us. What Nagarjuna talks about as conventional or relative reality that's shaped by language, that's shaped by words. And so this kind of genuine interest in what's beyond that and how to find it. So in 1988, 89, as I was kind of being immersed into these teachings, both the Hindu and the Buddhist tradition, I had the opportunity to travel to Nepal for the first time, and meet some great Tibetan Buddhist teachers there, including Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche. And I was part of the Naropa University Study Abroad program there. So we were staying close to the monasteries in Bodhanath. And Urgyen Tulku is a great Kagyu lineage Buddhist Rinpoche. And I'll always remember the students, we were all at this workshop, meditation teachings over the course of a weekend, and he was giving these very beautiful meditation teachings called Mahamudra. And he was talking about the nature, he was talking about Buddha nature and what it means to wake up. And he was contrasting the state of Buddha nature and waking up with a state of clear seeing, in which the mind has the luminous nature of emptiness. It's fully present, and it's not contaminated by the thoughts and kind of conditions of samsara. And towards the end of these teachings that went on for 2 days, a lot of Dharma talks, a lot of meditation practice. He says, when my hand is pointing out like this, then this is the state of the normal mind and the experience of samsara. He says, but when my hand turns inward, this is the state of Buddha mind. He says, and then so he slapped the table and he just turned his hand like this. And I was sitting about as close to him as I am sitting to this TV screen, and I'm 19 years old, again, still very impressionable. But it was one of the most remarkable experiences in my life, because when he slapped the table and his hand turned, it was just kind of like, old phonograph, they used to kind of start up slowly and then you get to where the music is playing. It was like the exact opposite of that. Like, and just stillness. And it was definitely a transformed experience of time. I don't know exactly how long. It just felt like I slipped from temporality into something eternal. And then he turned his hand back, and it was as if like the mind, the thoughts all came back. But for an unknown amount of time, I was just in this really beautiful crystalline state where it was just like, there we were in this moment. And I remember after the teachings wrapped up, we all went out into the hallway there and we were talking, and all of us excited students were like, did you experience that? Did you actually experience the stillness in that moment? And everyone claimed to have had that experience. So I'm very grateful for that moment, and it's definitely, and as I've gone on this journey, that's a moment that I've come back to with great appreciation and inspiration on my own meditation practice. And I was also fortunate to study with his son, Chokyi Nyingma Rinpoche, who also lived at Gampa Monastery, and also we were attending the monastery pretty much daily to study with both Chokyi Nyingma and his father, Urgyen Tulku. And I still remember one day I was walking along the path. My wife at that time and I were living in a little apartment outside of Bodhanath stupa in Nepal near this monastery. And I was walking along, my wife wasn't feeling well that day, and here comes Choki Nyingma with these two enormous Tibetan dogs, and he comes up to me and he says, he says, "How are you today?" And I said, "Well, I'm bringing medicine for my wife. She's not feeling very well." And he pointed at his monastery and he said, "Well, you should come in here with me. We should spend some time together. This is my home here." And I was very focused on getting the medicine to my wife, and I, said, "I'm sorry, I have to keep going." But that was definitely one of those moments as I reflect on my journey on the path. Perhaps I should have gone with him. And then finally, of the teachers that I met at that time, Dilgo Kensei Rinpoche in the Nyingma tradition. He's a great teacher of Dzogchen. With the idea of Dzogchen as a great practice that enables one to come in contact with or to experience the pure essence, the empty, luminous essence of Rigpa. And I just remember being seated in his monastery with him as he would engage in the rituals of the Vajrayana tradition that helped make the Dzogchen experience possible for his disciples. And then he passed away a couple years after that, and I had the opportunity to take students to see his reincarnation in 2008 in Bhutan. And remembered when I met him as a young man, he was about 17, and having the opportunity to say to him, "So wonderful meeting you 20 years ago when you were 20 years older than me." And of course, since then he had passed on, and this is the tradition in Tibetan Buddhism of the tulkus, right, where they're reincarnated and then they discover the reincarnation as a child. I think we'll pass over that. That looks like, and maybe that. There we go. Okay, and keep going. Yeah, so coming back from my journeys in Nepal and my studies there, I started my grad school training at the University of California in Santa Barbara, and I was specializing in Sanskrit, and I was doing a lot of research on Hindu Tantra, but also Buddhist Tantra, and had the opportunity then and was invited to teach a course on Zen Buddhism. And among many of the readings I was doing at that time, I was very inspired by the kind of simplicity and profundity and directness of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by Shunryu Suzuki, and then Philip Kappa, Roshi and the Three Pillars of Zen. Those were two key texts for me that were foundational for, or inspired my teaching at that course. And I'll come back to some of them. Okay, so there's one more series. So this is Guru Padmasambhava, very important teacher within the Tibetan Vajrayana tradition. It's believed to have revealed the teachings of Mahamudra initially, and then this is Dogen on the right. And putting all of these experiences and initiations and different practices I encountered on my journey at this point. I'm now about 25. This is the mid 1990s. I guess I'm actually approaching 30 at this point. And I was inspired as I looked at the Buddhist path and its emergence, and it spread into Tibet and it spread into Japan. The idea of the lightning bolt path, as it was expressed in Tibet, the idea of Satori or instant awakening in Zen Buddhism, and then the Hindu idea of the natural samadhi, and what these traditions and ideas teach us about human nature, about the mind, and about finding truth, whatever it means to find truth. So, I'm kind of a traditionalist. I like to go back to the narrative and the teachings of the Buddha. And as I found myself teaching Buddhism, I was reflecting on the way in which Siddhartha Gautama, who became the Buddha, was kind of genuinely engaged in an approach to spiritual life that seemed very empirical, seemed very consistent with the scientific method. And as my studies were developing in grad school, I was becoming increasingly interested in science and approaching life from an empirical perspective. So as you know, I'm sure as a young man, the Buddha had been sheltered from the truth of reality by his father, who was afraid that this destiny was going to come true, where the Buddha was going to be a great spiritual teacher and therefore leave the palace and not become a great king. And so he sheltered him, but eventually Siddhartha, his desire to see what was outside of the palace was so great, and he was given the opportunity to do that, and he saw the four signs of an old man, a sick man, a dead man, and then a sage. And he saw the truth of old age, suffering, sickness, and death, that everything changes, that sickness and old age and death are inevitable. And then in the presence of the meditator, the sage, the yogi, he saw the potential of a solution for that, and that inspired him then to leave the palace and to go out into the surrounding forest. Keep going there, keep going. So I'm kind of skipping ahead in the narrative to the three watches of the night. So Siddhartha Gautama, who's on the verge of becoming a great king and fulfilling this political destiny, goes out into the forest and he starts studying yoga. And he learns these methods for enabling him to sit in a posture for a very long amount of time as his breathing slows down his metabolism, and he can enter into this state of just sitting, and in just sitting to start seeing both inside of himself and the world around him, right? Seeing into the nature of truth. And I just find, this part of the narrative very, very inspiring and very, very meaningful. And so, long story short, just about 6 years of practice, he gets to this extreme where he's so engaged in asceticism, his body is weak from not eating, and he has to learn this lesson about finding the middle way. And after he finds the middle way, then he walks to the famous Bodhi tree outside of Bodh Gaya in India. And he sits under this tree of awakening for 49 days and nights. He, as I love to talk to my Barry students who are mostly Christian, right? So I like to talk about the parallels between the Jesus and the Buddha narratives, and how Jesus goes out into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights and sits in a space of solitude and meditative practice, and Buddha goes and sits under the Bodhi tree for a comparable number of days and nights. And Jesus encounters Satan, who tempts him, Buddha encounters Mara, who tempts him. And then towards the end of this process, Buddha goes through what are called the three watches of the night, which are stages during the evening, right? The first watch roughly from 9 or so to 1, and then the deep night is the second watch, and the third watch goes from the deep night until sunrise, right? And so during these times, as he's seated, just sitting, just in meditation, Shikantaza, he's seeing things, right? So in the first watch of the night, he sees how all of his actions across his multiple past lives had sown seeds that had consequences, that had effects. that had conditioned the trajectory he had been on through all of those lives leading up to this present moment where he was now seated under the Bodhi tree on the verge of enlightenment. And in the second watch of the night, it's like his awareness, it seems, is expanding out. He sees the universal law of karma as affecting for all living beings, right? It's not that some God or some other being is shaping the outcome for beings. Every being is reaping what it's sowing. And so he sees the cosmic law of karma. And the third watch of the night, as the sun's rising, he sees the truth of dependent origination. All beings are interconnected in the great web of Pratityasamutpada. And as a part of that, he sees the solution for how to bring beings into a state of freedom. And that's the Four Noble Truths, which includes the Eightfold Noble Path. And so for me, this is very inspiring, and it connects very much to Zen because it's right here in the foundation of the awakening of the Buddha. He just that, and he just witnessed, and in just seeing and just witnessing, he was awakened. So as I was kind of reflecting on the Buddha and the path of the Buddha in grad school, I was also fortunate to encounter Alan Wallace, himself a Buddhist in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and someone who's very interested in science and the interface of science and Buddhism, bringing the methods of science and Buddhism into kind of harmony, and kind of highlighting that whereas Western science is really focused on the outer world and developing the technologies that enable us to explore the outer world, whether it's micro level through microscopes or it's macro level through telescopes, that the science of Buddhism that goes back to the Buddha is one that has to do with using the mind as a laboratory for coming to understand the nature of consciousness, right? And so that kind of inspiration from Alan Wallace is been a significant one in my own journey. I also have found as a Buddhist that I've tried to maintain an openness and a balance between the ordinary, the empirically visible, the practical, the rational, not seeking or getting lost in the extraordinary and the miraculous, all on one hand, right? Kind of just being okay with like, spiritual life is simple. It's right here, man. It's in your breath. We're just ordinary people on the one hand, and then on the other hand, and to allow for this kind of recognition that reality is, there's something truly extraordinary to this reality. And I think there's a lot of different ways that we can look at it from just a scientific perspective. If it's true that 14 billion years ago, everything that exists now emerged from an infinitesimally small point, right, in the Big Bang, right? What an amazing theory. Like everything that exists now was compressed into this energy consciousness dot that it's so small we can't even fathom it, and yet now we have this infinite universe, right? So for me, that kind of balance is found in the teachings of Buddhism and the idea of the three turnings of the wheel. So I'm generally an agnostic Buddhist in the sense that, like, I try not to be dogmatic, but I try also to be open-minded. And as I learned the three turnings of the wheel, teaching from Urgent Tulku and Dilgo Kensei and Choki Nyingma and others, it was this idea that during the Buddha's life, he revealed three stages of teaching. And then they're called the turning of the wheel. And the first turning of the wheel associated with the three baskets of the Tripitaka, you have most fundamentally the teachings on the Four Noble Truths, right? And the teachings around the idea of the path and the importance of meditation and virtue, and the Theravada tradition that kind of houses that monastic form of Buddhism. Then with the second turning of the wheel, you get the Prajnaparamita teachings, the great wisdom teachings on the nature of emptiness and the union of form and the formless, and of course also the great teachings about compassion. And then in the third teaching of the wheel, you get the Tathagata Garbha, the Buddha nature teachings associated with the Yogacara. And the totality of these three teachings together are, for me, the kind of study of the development of these teachings and the profundity of the interrelationship of the teachings of the three turnings of the wheel are for me a constant kind of inspiration. And with the Buddha nature teachings in the third turning of the wheel, I think we really get to the heart of both Zen and Tantric Buddhism and kind of my own spirituality. So here's the statement from the Sutra of Hui Neng, the sixth patriarch. Our very nature is Buddha, and apart from that nature, there is no other Buddha. Right, so our very nature is Buddha nature. And so two more here. You probably know the story of Shentu and Hui Neng. So Shentu is looking like a good candidate to become the sixth patriarch, and he composes this brilliant poem. The body is the Bodhi tree, right? So what is the Bodhi tree? That's the tree under which the Buddha sat in enlightenment, sat under to become enlightened. And the mind is like a bright mirror stand. At times we must strive to polish it and must not let dust collect, right? So a real emphasis on the ideology of what came to be known as the gradual path, and consistent with the ideas of yoga that this spiritual path requires us to engage in this activity that polishes and cleans the mind. And when the mind is polished and clean, then in it, we can see the pureness of the Buddha, right? There's something to be done to get us to this place that we are not in now, right? We are suffering now. We're ignorant now. Must be something that we must do so that we can see ourselves as we are. And then the supposedly illiterate, simpleton Hui Neng, in response to this poem, composes, Bodhi originally has no tree. The mirror has no stand. The Buddha nature is always clear and pure. Where is there room for dust? Right? So this kind of brilliant not doing, right? There's nothing to do, emptiness. And yet, right, so the kind of the gist and the kind of subsequent commentary that comes on both of these poems, and that really I think is realized with Dogen, is this perfect union of the idea of a prescription, a practice that we have to do, with a realization that we seek to attain, right? If it is the case that we already are the thing that we are trying to attain, then at least in theory, there should be no practice, nothing that we have to do in order to become that which we already are, right? And yet at the same time, we all have this experience. I think many of us do, at least I can speak for myself. I spend most of my time not feeling like I'm awake, right? So that there is something, kind of a need to wake up and to purify. So then the kind of union here, oh, okay, let me go forward. Where was yes. One more time. One more time. Oh, okay, one more time. I got these guys in reverse order. The brilliance of Dogen. I'm gonna just come here and then I'm gonna go back. I think the beauty of is in the teachings of Dogen and Shikan Kaza, and this idea, hundreds of years of debate had unfolded within the Buddhist tradition between the idea, the importance of walking a path versus just recognizing that you already are that thing that you are seeking, and so therefore there is no path to walk. And so I think Dogen's brilliance is in saying that practice is realization. In the moment you are doing the practice, you are in that place of realization. You sit because Buddha sat, right? This is what Buddha did. Someone who's in that state does this thing. So we don't meditate to become the Buddha. We meditate because we are that nature. And also his teachings on being and time, that time is being, and that Buddha nature is itself impermanence, and of eradicating this distinction between the so-called enlightenment state of nirvana and samsara, realizing there is just one field of awareness. There is just pratitya samutpada, this infinite field of interconnectedness in which we find ourselves now. This is the Buddha field if we wake up to it and experience it as it is, and we do that by just sitting. And then this is also Dogen studying the Buddha way is studying oneself. Studying oneself is forgetting oneself. Forgetting oneself is being enlightened by all things. Being enlightened by all things is to shed the body, mind of oneself and those of others. No trace of enlightenment remains, and this traceless enlightenment continues endlessly. Okay, we could go back to Sheikh Abdullah J. I'm about to wrap things up here and get to the top of my mountaintop. Yes, thank you. Okay, so then I just wanted to give recognition to a few more beautiful beings that have blessed my path, as I've had this opportunity to walk the Dharma, which I think I view the Buddha as being someone who very much lived transcendent to labels, did not think we should be bound by words and labels, and we should kind of put first and foremost a commitment to be present to the moment and to take advantage of meeting great teachers and beings along the way. So in grad school, I had the great fortune to meet Sheikh Abdullah J. He's a Sufi master of the Muradiya tradition of Islamic Sufism. And I received baya or initiation from him, and was really inspired by the way in which contemplative practice is also a part of the Sufi path, and that they also use the importance of the idea of the body posture with the breath, and also, like Buddhists, also use mantra. And in their case, the mantras of the sacred words are from the Quran, but it's really about getting to the essence of the Allah, who is this idea, the who is the breath wisdom, that merges into the absolute, and ultimately Allah is beyond form. So Sheikh Abdullah J and I had some wonderful conversations about, the wisdom of the Heart Sutra's teachings on form and formlessness and Sufi understanding of Allah. And it was also in grad school that I got more immersed into the Hindu tradition known as Sarva Amnaya, and started studying the Guya Kali traditions of Nepal, and I won't get into all of the details here, but the symbol is a representation of a 22 syllable mantra. And as you kind of go through the stages of the symbol all the way to the top of the 11 heads, that's where you're supposed to enter into the infinite interconnected void that is the essence of all people, all beings. And so again, it just reminded me of these kind of rich intersections on emptiness and consciousness and human nature. Okay, thank you. Next. Yeah, so then as my journey's unfolded, I found myself, I got this job here at Berry College in 2003, and I've had the opportunity to launch the Rome meditation group that you all are warmly invited to anytime you want to come up. We meet every Wednesdays at 7. And then also some other, spiritual teachers from the area. Tom Blue Wolf is a Muskogee Indian Native American shaman who lives up in the Cahutta Mountains. This is his sweat lodge, and was been wonderful to connect with him and do sweat lodges on the full moon, and have learned the Native American kind of practice of purifying and breathing as the lodge heats up, right? The focus of the breath and being in the moment inside of the lodge. And then also wonderful American Buddhist teacher, Lama Rod, who lives here in Atlanta and is a graduate of Berry College, and really a brilliant example of someone who's taking teachings about the Dharma and really focusing on this idea of Dharma teaches us to be honest and true and compassionate within ourselves, and then enabling us to have compassion towards others and accepting them as they fundamentally are. And he's really kind of focused on the intersection of race, sex, and gender identity, and a lot of the kind of biases that people, are still holding on in the society. And really, he's taking the stance that this is something the Buddha was always absolutely opposed to, right? Judging people by their external form instead of recognizing that empty intersection of all of us where we're just pure being. Brilliance, Dogen, and we'll go. Okay, so there are hundreds of paths up the mountain, all leading to the same place. So it doesn't matter which path you take. The only person wasting time is the one who runs around the mountain, telling everyone that his or her path is wrong. This is a kind of Hindu proverb. So, kind of tried to integrate this talk as kind of around my own journey up the mountain. And so what are we seeing at the top of this mountain? And this gets to my next slide. Okay, so I'm trying to end with some thoughts I've been thinking about. You don't have to. Can we go back? Can you get? Yeah, start. I'm a one at a time kind of guy. Thank you. So I had the rich opportunity to teach a course last semester at Berry called American Buddhism, and just studied the migration of Buddhist traditions to the United States, which really begins in the late 19th century with the Chicago Parliament of Religion in 1893. And then after that, a whole number of waves of migration from Asian countries for different reasons, people from Cambodia and other places of Asia, Tibet, because of political and military events happening over there, and Buddhism kind of entering into the popular mainstream, and famous writers doing things like writing Dharma bums and Naropa Institution opening. And so we're at this point now where there's only 1% of the US population is Buddhist. There's only about 3 million folks actually identifying as Buddhist, but the influence of Buddhism is much greater than that. There's when you ask people like if they've read certain things or they've heard the word karma or whatever it is, then that percentage gets much, much higher. And it's interesting to reflect on both what connects and disconnects Buddhists in America and why Americans have been interested in Buddhism. I think there's a great deal of potential for American Buddhists moving forward to push the envelope a bit in terms of thinking through Dharma as a method more than a doctrine. And also there's, I think, potential for Buddhists across their sectarian affiliations to connect more with each other. So this is my little call on that front, that I think would call American Buddhists to be committed to a direct realization of truth that's transcendent to dogmatic affiliations. I think that's consistent with the Buddha himself. I think the dialogue with scientists in the Buddhist context is a fruitful one, and I hope that will continue. I think the scientific method is consistent with Buddhism on a fundamental level. Be committed to intra and interdenominational alliances. So within Buddhism and also outside of Buddhism, and people of other faiths and other communities. That kind of networking, I think, is very good. Move always towards the eradication of suffering in I meant concrete, not in contract terms. And I think this is a part of practice. I can say for myself, I first started meditating when I was 5. I've had different stages of intensity with my meditation practice. But one stage that I've been through at least once or twice is where you become so insular, you become so focused on yourself that you can become blind to the people in the world around you in your immediate sphere who may need some attention, some loving kindness directed towards them. So to not lose sight of that as you engage in your practice. And I think it's important to the affirmation of pluralism and the inalienable rights of all living beings, not just human beings, and placing compassion first and foremost in all of one's dealings. So wherever I am on this journey that started 5 years, perhaps together on a mountaintop with all of you here with me, these are kind of some of the reflections that I've come to along the way. And I just wanted to express that it's really beautiful experience for me coming here to sit with all of you and to have this time together, entering into a house of Dharma. It always feels like, this is home, this is the place to be. So with that, I'll just open it up to conversation, questions, anything folks want to talk about. Thank you.
Joe, did you want to lead with a thought?
I just have a couple of comments, but I'd rather wait till the end or let have a chance.
Okay. Anybody online, feel free to either come off mute, raise your hands, and if anybody similarly in the Zen, feel free to give a hand. Glenn,
Yeah.
a bit ago.
Yeah, this is great. I really thank you for your presentation. I think it's a very good presentation. I love all the points that you make at the end. I think what rang strongly for me is when you mentioned about Zazen sort of as a method you know, and a way to introduce people to that, you know, through method as opposed to through the dogma. Because I see just in my day-to-day practice, method is so important because my mind, it gets carried away with all of these things and all of these concepts and ideas. But for me, you know, bringing it back to the method, I think that's been one of the most powerful things that it seems to just make such a difference in my meditation experience, you know, to not get so carried away with all of these other things, but just go back to the method and stick with the method, you know, and then it's different every time. So I just wanted to, that just sort of struck me as something that's really, you know, really critical, and it's been really helpful for me in my practice. So thank you.
Practice, Glenn.
Yeah. Excuse me?
What is your practice? You have a clinical practice, or what?
No, just my meditation practice. Most recently here at the Atlanta Zen Center. Yeah. Just daily meditation practice, or daily practice of in general. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Glenn.
Yeah. Thank you.
See a hand from Robert. Go ahead, Gyoji.
Just want to thank you for sharing your journey with us. It was great, and it's, you know, you've got all this experience in your journey with different types of Buddhist traditions. If you had to tell us, or you know, what is the most fundamental of the teachings that you think that we should probably pursue from the different traditions? I mean, again, you know, or what do you think all the traditions, what is the basic teachings that you would say, if you could, you know, leaving today, you said, well, this is something I think that everyone should really focus on as the basics, what would you say?
That's a great question. I mean, I think one of them would be that the only place you're going to find the truth is here and now, in this moment. So try to be open to it as much as possible, right? Including like that whole idea of emptying the mind to just being here in this moment, not trying to look for it somewhere else. I think also the teaching on interconnectedness, right? Pratitya samutpada, what the Buddha sees in the third watch of the night, that to me, the implications of that are just so profound on so many levels, right? So that we are all connected to each other, but beyond that, like the Buddha meant, like everything is connected to everything else. There's only one infinite web, and it's both full and it's empty at the same time. So we're all interconnected with each other and all beings. Like, you know, that's where I ground my environmentalism. For me, it's not political, it's ontological, it's reality, and we have to take care of all these beings and each other. And it's really big. And then I think the third that I would focus of three teachings that are foundational for me is compassion, right? Staying attuned to and aware of the suffering of others, you know, and taking the steps that you can to eradicate them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi. During your presentation, I was really excited to see that you ventured into all these different traditions, these different religions, and you sort of saw like a large cross section of how everyone like uses getting up this mountain and different paths that they take. My question to you is, do you feel that seeing all these traditions, that they all sort of said the same thing, or all the instructions were kind of all together, or do you see some of them diverging, or did you get contradicting instructions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm here was mostly focused kind of like, of course, on my own journey in the world of yoga, right, and meditation. So there is a good bit of overlap in the teachings that I've received, but I mean, this is kind of a timeless question. So I'm a religious studies scholar, right? So I'm personally grounded in this yoga path both Hindu and Buddhist kind of wings of it. And as a religious studies scholar, I'm kind of more broadly concerned with just religion, period, all of it, like where it came from. And like in my investigations of religion, it's every religion that's ever existed is fair game, right? It's kind of like a biologist. If you're interested in life, then you're kind of interested in all of life, right? We can't specialize on all of it. But so in this larger kind of conversation about religion, you have this debate between the perennialists who are arguing that all the paths are going up the mountain, right? They're ultimately the same. And on the other side of this debate is the constructivists who are arguing for difference. No, it's not all the same. There might be things that are similar, but people are saying different things, right? Buddhists are not being saved by believing in Christ, and Christians are not just sitting and trying to experience empty minds. Right? There's a lot that's going on that's different. So I look at that and think, it's kind of like talking about us humans, like here we are in this room together, and the folks that are like fundamentally genetically we're the same, right? And we got legs and bodies and hearts, and we have emotions, and we were born out of mama's bellies and stuff like this. So much. And yet on another level, we are all fundamentally different, right? We're all having different experiences, different backgrounds, right? So they're both I think, very true. And so I try to, I've had some experiences in Native American sweat lodges and the presence of Sufis and Buddhists and Hindus that have felt very similar. And so I resonate with the kind of perennialist mystical claim that ultimately there's one ground of being and we're connecting with that being. And I have found in my own journey, like that feels true. I recognize that in my journey, the consciousness that's engaged all of these paths has been my own consciousness. So they're all ways of like connecting with my consciousness. And so on one hand, I do recognize and feel like it's harmonious and appreciated. At the same time, I do try to respect and also recognize there are important differences, right? And so coming and studying in a Soto Zen context is not the same set of practices as would be to go and sit in a Hindu Tantric or an African tribal or whatever, So it's not an easy answer, but the kind of yes, no. And I do think you have to move towards what inspires you, right? And find your path and your way. And that sometimes you do find like, no, that teaching's not what I need, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Comments in the room? Comments online? I have a question, Doctor. And it's going to be relatively broad, but going through these different teachings and lineages and origins of religious teachings, do you have any comments or thoughts about the presence of culture? Is culture able to be isolated from the belief systems or traditions, or are they sort of one and same and inseparable? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It's a great question. What's the connection between culture and religion? To what degree does religion live through and inseparably from culture? Right. Culture is definitely part of the construct, right? We construct a system of meaning with language and symbols, and we create music, and we create temples and festivals where we can live our culture, and our culture gets linked to our religious ideas in a way that in a lot of cases, like say African tribal traditions, that you cannot separate the culture from the religion. The culture is just a pure, if you like, expression of that religion. But in the case of like yoga and Buddhism, you also have like this whole method of deconstruction, right? We're gonna deconstruct the language and the symbols that we've been raised and embedded in our culture and society, and trying to find that part of ourselves that existed prior to those constructs, right? And that kind of, in my mind, it's almost like the original culture of Buddhism, right? Where Buddha goes out, and I'm gonna break free of all this stuff and find what's out there. And I think in the evolution and history of Buddhism, Buddhism keeps getting reintroduced into new cultures, like American culture, whatever the heck that is, right? It's a fascinating topic. And taking on the garb of these places such that you can talk about Japanese Buddhism, Vietnamese Buddhism, Indian Buddhism, etc., and so forth. But all along the way, those kind of what I feel like the original technologies of deconstruction, so that you can find Buddha mind, are also traveling along. So I have a lot of respect for the various Buddhist cultural traditions, but for me, ground zero and what's most important are these meditation techniques that I think are transcendent to culture.
Joseph?
Yeah, I just want to, I guess, just to start, thank you for the brilliant discussion. It's clear you had these really profound influences from like a constellation of different kind of traditions and practices. That, you know, I guess the thing that strikes me is just about, you know, Buddha himself also had, I don't hesitate to say it's a comparative religious approach, but like he would often try to identify, oh, these are the creeds and beliefs that you have, and here's how my teaching can relate to that, or it may be hard for you to understand my teaching due to your pre-existing cultural conditioning that's like blocking you from seeing a broader understanding of things. But I guess just one of the lightning bolts that seemed like your talk was sending out is like struck me about, you know, I mean, I guess just in an initial summary of the Dharma in Buddha's time was sort of pushing back, I think, in one way against the caste system, the stratification, and like, I guess maybe to try to help people rebuild their dignity in such conditions that were oppressive for them. So, I mean, it seems that there is, I don't know, maybe this is a weird question, but like there's a radical or revolutionary core, like sort of utilizing the Vedic traditions of like being able to like manifest and intensify a self concept, but kind of, to your point, deconstructing the self that society has sort of given you this set of roles that it's, anyway, sorry, that's a bunch of things, and I'm not sure.
I mean, I think it was a radical, and like his teaching on Atman, no self, is definitely, I think, grounded in his scientific perception, his direct perception on the nature of reality, like we aren't separate selves. But I think it was also simultaneously a real strong critique of the Hindu idea of the Atman as something that's inseparably linked to this caste system that privileges certain selves who tended to basically be lighter skinned Brahmins at the top of the caste system, we knew the Vedas, over and against people at the bottom, right? So I think in one aspect of American Buddhism, like with Lama Rod, I think really takes something that's really true to the Buddhist method from the beginning, that the Buddha was, genuinely interested in the well-being of people, regardless of their gender and their caste, right? Like we're all fundamentally equally, we're all empty, we all have Buddha nature, we're all worthy of love and compassion without exception. And yeah, to me, like that, getting back to the question of like what are the core teachings, like that's really it, I think. Like what's the value of your meditation practice if it can't translate into that kind of awareness?
Give us one more moment of space for those online, and then shift it over to either John or Hoda for finishing remarks. Anyone online? John or Hoda?
Please.
Yeah, it occurred to me, when you summarize there at the end and start listing the kinds of things that you think the American modern Buddhists should, think to watch for, pay attention to. We've been discussing here that context in which we practice, I have a model of, personal, social, natural, universal, nesting spheres. We have a connection with all of those, and we have a lot more information about all of those than was prevalent in Buddhist time or Dogen's time. And so we've been discussing ideas like the 16 noble truths, you know, the 36-fold noble path. Everything is just so much more complicated. That's things you started listening are kind of along those lines. That was one thing. Thich Nhat Hanh did a revision of precepts at one point, and it looks like to me that we probably, for Westerners and Americans in particular, maybe need to start defining a little more technologically updated path and basic fundamental truths.
Yeah.
Which in the science realm, the way I think of the noble truths, you ask the question, what makes them so noble? Right? And one answer is that, like the noble gases, they do not interact. They're inert. They don't interact with circumstance. They're true everywhere and at all times. So the other question for you was about your mom. You met your mom a couple times earlier. What was she thinking? 5 years old. All these different things. Look what happened.
Yeah, she's here. She's Anne's iPhone. She's silent right now. But yeah, no, so I mean,
Mom, good job.
I was born in 1968 in Boulder, and of course, 60s is the age of the hippies, right? So
Sure.
my mom and yeah, we're definitely exploring on the hippie path, and I think she was like, yeah, she wanted to raise Buddha baby.
The other thing I wanted to say is I'd like to gift you a copy of my first book,
Oh,
Original
thank you.
Frontier.
Okay.
The second book may be a little more relevant to your orientation, which you mentioned today, but I don't have any copies of that.
Okay. Wow, thank you very much.
Any closing remarks from the Dr. John before we do closing first?
Did you have anything?
I'm just, it's just a great joy to be here in Sangha together with those physically present and also those on Zoom. So wish everybody a beautiful Sunday and all the best in your meditation practice. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Lidke, for making the trip into Atlanta to be with us this morning.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So with the closing, we chant the 4 vows, 4 great vows, we chant it 3 times.
Beings are utterless. I vow to freedom. Delusions are exhaustible. I vow to end them. Our gates are boundless. I vow to do them. The way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to freedom. Delusions are impossible. I vow to end them. Our gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The little way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The little way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you all.
Thanks to all your patience.